be switched to silent. So to begin with introductions, I'm the chair of the panel, Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Deputy Porray, and I'm a panel member.
Deputy Helen Miles, panel member.
Deputy Rob Ward, Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning.
Rob Sainsbury, Chief Officer, Department of SIPES.
Keith Posner, Director of Improvement and Transformation at SIPES.
Sean O'Regan, Director of Education.
Jonathan Williams, Programme Director.
Anne Homer, Head of Finance Business Partnering for SIPES.
Okay, thank you everyone, and unfortunately Conor Labby, the Vice Chair, can't be with us today. We just have 1 hour for this hearing, so I'll start with the questions, which is around the business plans. So Minister, we note from your letter to us on the 6th of September that business plans will not be completed until the end of 2024 and published in early 25. How do you propose robust scrutiny of these plans if they're not available?
Well, these are business plans for next year, so they'll be at the beginning of the year, and they will come to the scrutiny panel as well. So, and what we're doing in the government plan will effectively form what's going on in those business plans in terms of our priorities. And the rest of them, as they're published, I'm sure will be under close scrutiny. If you want early sight of things, we're more than happy, always been happy to do that with the scrutiny panel, just as long as you recognise that they're drafts.
Well, if we could have any information, I think we did ask for that as well, because we need to debate these before we have all the information. So if we could have anything that you have got drafted.
Well, the business plans are indeed business plans in terms of the intentions of what we want to do, which has to come from the department. So the agreement or not with that is a different issue. But yeah, absolutely, we need to provide anything that we can.
Okay, so if we could write and we can ask for that.
Yeah. And also feedback on them. That's the important thing. I mean, I think we're very open to that feedback, and we have acted on, quite willing to act on things if, when things come up.
Okay, so about the priorities for 2025 compared to 2024, can you list any changes that are being made, if any, and the impact these may have on current resources?
Yeah, well, obviously the main priorities come from the CSP, so they've been slimmed down so they're deliverable, and I believe that all of those are deliverable. About nutritious school meals in every school, which I know will be in place. I can talk more about that if you want to. The extended nursery and childcare provision has a number of pilots in place, so we're starting along that process of implementation after what's been a long period of discussion and roundtables and so on. And the increase in provision of lifelong learning and skills development is something that's actually become very interesting as it's developed in itself, because the dialogue that started to happen is driving that as well. So it's really interesting. I'm actually very pleased that I added the lifelong learning to the remit, because I think it started discussions as to where we're going to go well into the future, way beyond me and all of us in this assembly, to be quite frank. So those are the main priorities. In terms of differences, there will obviously be differences in the capital programme, because that's changed and that will change as time goes on. But there's a lot of business as usual as well, which will carry on. The emphasis on support for special educational needs in schools, the implementation of the funding formula for the majority of our schools is quite important. And that's still embedding, I would say, and that any improvements that can be taken from that will happen. But just because we have some priorities doesn't mean there's not business as usual going on.
Okay, is there any particular objectives which have changed that come to mind right now?
Not really. I mean, in terms of, not overall. I mean, the objective, the overall objective is to provide the best possible education system and access to education for all of our young people on the island and beyond. Perhaps the one emphasis is that it's not just about people up to the age of 18, and we're trying to look a little wider.
Okay, so longer term.
Yeah.
And the government has had to divide the SIPES portfolio into two separate heads of expenditure. Can you advise us if that split has been fairly straightforward? Yeah,
well, when you say the government, actually it was a drive from myself to make that divide, so that there's more of a clarity.
That's into children and families and education.
Absolutely, so there's more of a clarity of where that spend is going. and also more of a clarity on what we're actually spending on education. I would say I think there are some future conversations to be had about education and its funding level, which may have been hidden in the past. I don't want that to be hidden, and then we have to have the intelligent and difficult conversations about how we're going to fund education appropriately. So I'm more than happy to do that. It also gives a focus, I think, on education, its effective spending, and some of the things that we can do in the future to make what we're doing as effective as possible. So I'm happy with that split.
More clarity then. And are there any areas of crossover, though, where the budget or reporting lines are less clear?
Yeah, there obviously will be. There's always going to be something like that. One of the things that we do is every Friday, including this morning, we have an overlap in the meetings, the ministerial meetings. So we'll have 30 minutes to an hour where both ministers are there sharing any common areas. The provision, I think, my mind's gone absolutely blank to think of an example. Let me think of a good example. Stop me is, for example, the interaction of CAMS in schools might be a good example of that. CAMS really comes under the children's remit, but its impact in schools is essential, so that communication between the two has to be there. But it does mean there's a focus on CAMS. It's a focus on what's happening in schools, so you can talk specifically about their role in that area, which I think could be really beneficial into the future.
Okay, and my next question is about those priorities that you've mentioned already, the nursery childcare provision, the school meals for every child in the primary schools, and the provision of lifelong learning and skills development. Can you inform the panel how these have been costed?
Yeah, I might. Who's the best person to talk about specifics? In terms of the school meals, I can start easily with that. There was a budget in place for that, which was an estimate from the number of meals we would have been estimated uptaking and the total cost. And I think we're pretty much spot on with that in terms of the uptake at the moment. That project should be extended to all schools by the end of this year. I think we've solved the problem with one servery, which is really good. There are 54 catering assistants been recruited, and there are currently 16 schools providing school meals, and there's launch dates for all the remaining schools. So we'll know where we are, and we'll know what the uptake is, both in terms of Jersey Premium and that cost, and also the uptake in parents paying for a meal, which is pretty good, I believe.
And do you think that's all the state's primary schools will have this in place by the end of the year?
I believe that is the case by December.
By the end of the year.
And to invite the panel, I think we've come along and seen one of them in
yeah.
action, actually. Christmas lunch in one of the schools. I'll be honest, I was at St John's School the other day, and it was absolutely lovely. The way that schools organise them are fantastic. I'd like to say publicly to the schools, to say thanks for the way that they've just taken on this task and got on with it and delivered. And it's really quite an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, good. So the way these have been costed, that's nursery and childcare provision as well, and the provision of lifelong learning and skills development, that's all.
The nursery one's going to be more difficult to accurately cost because we have to try out pilots. And the whole idea of piloting is to see the impact of that pilot, whether it can work in the setting that it's in, the impact wider, and the uptake as well, because it's difficult to estimate accurately what the need is out there. But by taking some pilots on, so that, the worst case scenario is we start a pilot and no one wants it.
So you'll see what happens with the pilots
But we
with
have
that
to be
one.
realistic about those and be brave enough to say if nobody wants it, then we end that as a pilot.
And then the other one was the provision of lifelong learning and skills development.
Yeah, there is a budget put aside for that. Some of that is driven by the outcomes of P12 in the Assembly, so part of my priorities have already been driven by that, which I have to adapt to. We're going to make some announcements soon about distance learning, which will come with a cost. There are some costs in the apprenticeship programme that come from some really practical things, so, for example, the cost of the assessments in some areas I was going to say skyrocketed, but that's not fair. But they have certainly increased significantly, and we're going to have to cover those costs if we want to continue with those programmes and extend and target what we're training on the island.
Okay. We note that the figure for school meals does not increase and remains at a certain amount for the life of the budget, 2025 to 28. Are you not expecting any increase in this cost?
Well, there's a couple of things in terms of, do you want to, because we talked about this the other day, because I asked a similar question. Do you want,
Yeah, I can pick this up.
just
So-
because you've got some figures?
So absolutely. I
Is
think
that
one of the
okay?
advantages of the piloting nature of this programme has meant we're ending up on a budget amount that we're confident in. So in terms of the model of the distribution and cooking of food, in terms of the staffing for the food, we're also looking to introduce next year free fruit for all the Government of Jersey primary schools as well, and we're looking to a free school provision within secondary schools as well. So that will be the focus of the team in 2025 once the primary school food has been rolled out. But in terms of, I suppose, budget surety, we've had time to prepare for this because we've been through the different steps, and we've been through small pilots into slightly larger pilots into an island-wide pilot to settle on a model. So that's why the budget is from 25 remains as it will be going forward. We will obviously need to be looking at inflationary pressures on the programme itself, and we'll have to look at how we build that in. But in terms of the cost of the programme, that's what we expect it to be.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And my next question was the funding for the skills provision, which is, I've got the figure here of 1,158 in 2025. I'm assuming that's millions. It's written as 1,000 in my paperwork.
Zero. It's the way that data is presented. I totally agree with you on that.
And so, how will that be spent? What's the actual plans for spending it?
Yeah, I've got some data on that here. I had a graph. So around £500,000 is involved with the apprenticeships, so the type of increase in the costs of those. Did you say 25? I've actually got some numbers. Hold on.
So 29.
29. Forgive me a sec. So that, well, I know it off by heart to be quite frank, about £500,000 is regards in developing apprenticeships, but some of that will be significantly used because of the increase in assessments, for example, which are costs that we don't want to pass on to employers because we haven't done that in the past. There will be a figure for distance learning that we can estimate, increase in tuition fees and maintenance awards, partly driven by the propositions that have come in the past, will cover as well a significant amount of that, proportion of that. And when you add those up, the estimate is £1.158 million in 2025. I think we need to have some flexibility in that because with student numbers, we're never certain about total student numbers. We're never certain about we estimate inflation and we should be okay with that. But we want some flexibility built in as well. There are always issues over what tuition fees will be, and I really hope that they don't increase in the UK. There's been some horrible rumours about that, which I think is really the wrong thing to do. If anyone in the English British government's listening, don't do that. It's a really bad idea. So there will always be estimates. But what I would think would be a very good idea with the panel is as we go through the year, we can give you some more accurate figures on where it's being spent, because that also helps us to review where we are. And I know Anne produces lots of data as we go through monthly.
Okay.
But it won't all be front loaded. I think we've got to be sensible about, again, it's just like this project process. It's the notion of piloting. What's working well? Do we need to direct money into that? Is that the right thing to do? I'm not afraid to make changes if it's not the right thing to do. We can't just carry on down paths if it's not working. We think this is the right thing to do.
Thanks. Okay. Now, I think you've just mentioned student finance. Because my next question is, we note there's no reference to student finance within the description of lifelong learning and future skills provision. So
pretty much that's because I would consider that as business as usual. We fund university places. We have student finance in place. The differences will be uplifts to the income thresholds, entitlement to grants, and aligning of the value of the maintenance grants with cost of living and wage increases. Some announcements we're going to be making soon on that, and the detail of that will come. So but I do see that as business as usual, with any additional costs having to perhaps be covered through by the lifelong learning budget, which is quite important.
Can I just ask a question about the student finance? The postgraduate bursary was first established in 2000.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been increased from the 10,000. Is there any provision in this budget to actually, if you increased it for cost of living from 2020, from 2010, it would be quite a lot of money, but have you got any plans to increase that postgraduate bursary?
That's not a priority we have at the moment. I'd love to do that, but that's not a priority we have at the moment. We've got to deal with the distance learning. Again, it was pretty much determined by P12 as it came through, and we've got to react to that because we said we would, and we amended it appropriately, I believe. So we'll deal with distance learning as well. I think we've got some plans coming forward for that, which are very good. And also the increases to the thresholds for main grants.
Okay, but no plans for postgraduates in this
not
year?
at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's me now.
Oh, 17,
Yeah.
my set of questions are about the Cyprus estates and capital projects. Again, if the budget's approved, you're going to receive 7.79 million 25, 3.8 in 2026, 2.5 in 27, and back up to 4.7 in 2028 for the upgrades to the Cyprus estates. So I think the question is, why does the funding decrease so much between 25 and 26?
Is this in terms of upgrades? Do you
Upgrades to the
want?
sites.
Are you happy for Keith, who's been so deeply ingrained in this, that he'll give you? I think.
The main difference between 25 and 26 is about Asarab School, which is our kind of major project within this head of expenditure, and there's £3 million of value that the school will be budgeted to cost within 2025.
So why does that represent a decrease then in the funding?
So the budget will be for 2025. We've had an addition. We put additional
for the
funding.
additional, and then it's come
And
down
then
for the other, right?
because that's a one-off 2025 figure. The other figure as well, and I know that you have questions about this later on, we do have a proportion of the education network upgrading Wi-Fi project within 2025 as well. And then it kind of levels out into a similar position year on year.
Okay. Are you content that funding's adequate to carry out the necessary? And have you got an additional funding contingency?
I mean, I've got to say, whenever you ask a minister if funding is adequate, any minister who says yes is not doing their job properly, I would always ask more money. There is a real challenge in terms of estate spending. We've prioritised. One of the good things about that £3 million being spent is it means that a project will be completed and there will be a school facility in place. Yeah. And I'm really hoping by late October next year, early November, and earlier if it's possible to do that, up and running and there, which is something that I'm really pleased with. And I had a briefing this morning, ministerial meeting, and they worked incredibly well on that. In touch with, I keep doing touch with that things going, because you know what, lots of things go wrong with planning permissions and so on. You never know, but it should be okay. So that's really good. In terms of the upgrading of estate, yes, absolutely. There is so much to do across schools, and that will always be the case. We could always do more, I'm absolutely certain.
So is there a contingency in place?
There's always some contingency in place for emergencies. We hope we don't have storms again because... You know, but if there are, then we would have to come up with contingencies because schools have to open.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to talk about Montalabé.
Yeah.
We know that there's overcrowding at Montalabé School. We know that it needs immediate attention, and we know that temporary measures have been put in place, and that's very good. But obviously, the concern is that the funding for the changes required to do the major upgrades at Montalabé are not due to be implemented until 2026. Your letter told us that that's due to the rephasing of the government capital programme.
Yeah.
And again, when we saw you at the public hearing a couple of weeks ago, you said that there was an issue with the capital projects. Can you just talk about how the decision for what capital projects through SIPES, the ones that were going to be delayed, were arrived at?
Yeah, there's two. I'm sure Keith will add something to it in a minute, but there's a realism to it. We looked at what projects are actually genuinely ready to go, which projects are there, which projects will be in a phase where we could say, right, we're going to do that, but there's no planning permission or there's no genuine plans with a time scale that is realistic in that time. If we're not at that stage, I would rather get on with projects and prioritise those that are there. I do feel, and I'm sure some will disagree, that there had perhaps previously been a habit for many years, I could say, in government, to everything was a priority when it came to a capital project. You can't prioritise everything. You have to decide what you are or not going to do. I believe there was a figure of £17 million put aside last year and £5 million was spent. And that's an example of when large priorities are made and money is allocated that simply can't be spent. I think we can spend money and get projects done now.
In terms of the prioritisation, you know, you've talked about project management, project planning and bricks and mortar. To what extent did the impact that not going ahead with Montelabe would have on children and families factor into this decision making?
Yeah, well, there's also contingency plans that we can put in place for the increasing number. One of the possible things that could be not an advantage but a mitigating point about the delay is I actually think that the plans previously, and you'll probably kill me for this, perhaps were a bit small for the school. And I think it gives us an opportunity to readdress that. The example being, I think we all wish we'd have built the Kennebec a bit bigger nowadays. And I think hindsight's a wonderful thing, and that's not a criticism, it's just where we are. And I think we've got to take the advantages where they are from these projects being delayed. Also, there are some mitigating... Do you want to go on? Because I know I can see you...
I'll make a comment. I think Sean might want to come in on the mitigation point.
Yeah,
certainly in terms of the prioritisation piece, one thing I would say, and Cyprus doesn't work in just a vacuum. We obviously work with the Treasury and with JPH in terms of making sure that the programme overall for the government works as well. But the Minister's absolutely right. Although this has been in the programme for a while, there has been changes in thinking in terms of the size of the school. But we still have a lot of work to do to get it ready to start building as well.
That sort of leads me sort of well onto the question. So you've got 400,000 in for 2026. Is that what is going to include kind of feasibility work? We're not talking about...
So we've already started the feasibility work, and we are in active discussions with our colleagues in Jersey Property Holdings about how we can accelerate that as much as we can and do the work ahead of time. They'll be spending 2025, they'll also be spending 2026.
Okay, so the feasibility won't stop in 2025, it will carry through on the 24 money and then be topped up in the 26.
Absolutely, yes.
And then the 10 million in the 27 will be the actual construction costs.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful.
I mean, it might not be wanted. I mean, everybody wants everything now, and I absolutely understand that. I've visited the school, visited lots and lots of schools, and every single school I go to have a project that is the most important thing, and I absolutely accept that.
But this is the school for our most vulnerable children.
Yeah, absolutely. And the mitigating thing, which Sean will talk about in a minute, we're trying to put in place. But the realistic timescale of that delivery, particularly if we can deliver something that becomes more appropriate with time, could be a positive that comes out of that delay as well. We don't want to delay anything, but I think that's quite important. We don't want to build something that is redundant before it's built. And I think we are seeing increasing levels of need for all sorts of reasons, and also Montelabe do an incredible job. So,
okay,
you know,
thank you.
I've been to visit myself.
Do
you want to just talk about some of the things? Is that okay?
No, that's absolutely. I'm just conscious
Mindful
of
Yeah,
of
so
time.
just for a minute or so.
We've had meetings most recently this week, is myself with the head teacher, the team, as the Minister has said. The design brief we've given to JPH will be for a bigger, better Montelabe at the end of this. And we've done considerable work with mainstream schools that used to have additional resource centres, ARCs, remodelling them to provisions and setting up new nurture provisions, primary and secondary, that will meet the needs of children who may need Montelabe at some point.
but not have it at the moment.
But not have it at the moment. So plans are in place that at another time we can elaborate.
We'll be really interested to hear that kind
absolutely.
of moving forward. Thank you.
And we want to get that right.
Yeah, understand that.
Of course.
I think we've just touched on the extra 3 million for the expenditure that's going to be allocated to La Passerelle, but it wasn't a project that was detailed last year. So can you just explain to us how that project has been prioritised?
Simply, I'll say from my priorities, there was an incredibly obvious need. There were children who did not have a place to be educated. And when you put that together with the fact that we have a site, we have a place, we know what we're going to do with it. We've also got the additional, what's the other building called? I always forget. The building that's attached. The lodge as well, which does not need as much work as we thought we would, so it'd be quicker. In fact, indeed, it may be the first thing that's ready, so it can provide some really specialist support in particular areas. So I think the impact of that build on a cohort of young people that are not accessing education at the moment is significant. And there's a timescale where it can be done. So I'm not criticising anything that's gone before. I'm looking ahead and saying it would be nice to be able to say something is completed and in action within a year.
Okay, thank
and that's really good.
Yeah. My last question about this gas school place project, no longer going ahead until 2027.
Yeah.
How is that going to impact your overall budget for education, given the very high volume of children in town schools already?
I agree. Again, there's a realism to this as well. We don't have planning permission yet, and we don't have the land. That has not been sorted out.
Is it likely to start in 2027?
I really hope so, and I am pushing. I'd rather come back to the panel with that actually, rather than saying anything publicly now, because I haven't had the meeting yet. It's next week, I believe.
And if you can get it sooner, will you up the priority
If we
list?
can get that sooner, I will do everything in my power to get it sooner. I'm not being funny. I brought the thing to the island plan 4.5 years ago, and it has been a trigger for me for years. And I'm sure the department before I was doing this was sick of me going on about it. But yeah, absolutely right. But there is a reality here. I could sit here and say, yes, we're going to promise to do this in a year's time. It won't happen in a year's time because we don't have planning permission and we don't have the land yet. Those things need to be sorted out. I think they could be sorted out relatively quickly, whatever relatively quickly means in terms of planning on this island, but relatively quick because I think there's a drive to do that. And I think, importantly, the argument over whether it should be there has been completed.
Thank you.
That's really important to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for asking, actually. It's nice to be able to talk about it.
Minister, the critical Wi-Fi infrastructure project has funding of 840,000 only for the year of 2025. Do you feel this is an adequate amount of funding?
I think from where we are, this will produce the upgrades that we need.
Yes, that's right. There is money being spent in this year as well.
Yeah.
And this is obviously the 2025 budget, so there's an element being spent this year. The total budget for the upgrading work, the implementation part is 1.3 million.
So you're confident that that budget will complete all the necessary works for that year?
Yes, I've been speaking with our colleagues in digital services who are leading this project for us. And they are confident in terms of the allocation of the budget, yes.
Okay.
There are 3 phases to the work, and the third work, which is a network deployment of a new wide area network design, a new WAN, I believe they're called. Thank you for my technology there. By quarter 1, 2026, hopefully. But I don't know if timescales are different in the digital world. They might be.
So in the event that the project goes over budget, over the time scale, is there any contingencies in place to deal with those events?
Yeah, to put it simply, Deputy, it's so important in a modern world of education that we have to get this completed and done, and I think that is a priority that will work.
So I would just add to that, in terms of contingency, where we're in that position, it's similar to the school meals. If we're in a position where you've got inflationary impact or there's a problem where your cost is over your estimate, we have a really tried and tested process with the Treasurer and with the Treasury Department around how we might meet that demand, because it's an unexpected pressure, and that's where the department is able to seek a letter of comfort or direct funding. And our experience has been positive in terms of where we've had those issues. We've had that previously with school meals. It would be the same for the Wi-Fi pressures if we get an expended consequence of cost.
I think it'd be fair to say that there's quite a bit of learning that's gone on from some of the projects and the way they've been implemented, and the notion of piloting, see how they work and expand them when they're working. And I think that's a good model I think it's a good model for government, if I dare say, that piloting and expanding in a controlled way, so you know actually what your costs are, and your estimates are much more accurate then. I think that's a very good way to do it.
Okay, thank you. We understand that the capital expenditure for field development and play space has been delayed until 2028.
Yeah.
Could you give us a bit more detail on why did that happen?
Again, this is to do with some of the projects as well. So some of the projects that we're talking about, and I won't say about specific ones because I don't think it'll help the situation, but effectively we don't have the land. There's still negotiations going on about the land itself in order to increase these access to fields. There's always difficult negotiations going on about the cost of that and whether they're relevant costs. Personally, I don't think it should take that long to adapt a field once we've got it in place. And these are the type of projects whereby I would say they have to move and they have to get somewhere. I would like to see a number of projects ready to move forward with at a stage, so that should we be able to find money with the capital project, because perhaps something else hasn't worked, because there are always issues, we can use that money. Effectively, what I'd like to say is, whatever money we've got each year, I want to spend it on the capital project. I think previously it's been held, and then it's lost because of the nature of our finance law. And I'd like to make sure it's spent if we've got projects ready to go. That doesn't mean they need to prioritise. It means I think it's a more sensible approach to having so many projects on the go.
So this particular project is not so much about financial strains, but more the fact that you haven't found that particular land that fits the project.
I would say it's a bit of both. I'm not going to say here and say it's not financial constraint. Yeah, the financial constraints are an issue, and if we had more money, I'm sure we could do more. But there is also a reality to it in terms of we might come to a point where if we had more money, we wouldn't be able to spend it anyway because we haven't got the purchase of the field and we haven't got the negotiations right.
So
we don't overspend either on things.
I was just going to ask, none of these possible projects in that category going to be available, the land and that ready before 2028? That's quite a long time.
2028 is 3 years off. I hope they will be available by then because the work needs to be done. But it does depend on external sources to some extent because we are negotiating over land, some of which might be used for housing, and then we get a sort of offset of that land, a piece of that land for the school. That happens quite a lot. It happened in, was the field in St John or was that the parish?
St John.
St John, for example, that managed, and that took quite a time. These projects do take time. Yes, I'd love to speed them up. And if there's anybody out there who wants to offer some land to schools and we can speed that process up, please do. You're more than welcome to come along and do that because we'll absolutely welcome that. But yeah, 2028, yep, that's where we are.
Thank you for that, Minister. We note that the feasibility work for certain projects, such as music development, will not be progressed in the government plan for 2025. How has that decision been made?
Are you referring to the Jersey Music Service?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, that is one of the priorities, which hasn't made it to the top of the pile, I'm afraid.
Yes, okay.
Do you want to say something about that?
All I would say, I think there's, again, it's a bit of a realism where we are with the programme. If there isn't funding within the plan to develop the project further, we won't be concentrating feasibility funding on those projects at this stage. That's just a reflection of the programme.
Okay. So have you taken into consideration the impact that this will have for the young people and the consequences of not having that activity?
So we have a team at the moment who are looking at facilities for music service. We know those facilities could be better. And there's pressure on those, and they're actively looking at other options over the next, I suppose, the medium term. And then the Minister will need to be thinking about the next iteration of the capital programme going forward and whether new facilities or upgraded facilities or a different model for those facilities is going to be introduced.
That would be interesting to see.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think as well that some of these can be dependent on other areas of government and the decisions made. For example, around fault, whether if the fault is developed and facilities become available there. Other areas of the capital of the government estate, for example, if things become available. I've always thought, we have lots of buildings, and if they become available, they need to be more joined up and say, we're looking for somewhere for the music service. If there's a building that suits that purpose that isn't being used, I don't see why it shouldn't be simple in government to say, you know what, that's a really feasible option for us, which is affordable sooner than we thought, and let's get on and use that. The music service will still be in schools. Much of the vast majority of their work is out in schools. Peripatetic music teachers, that's still the correct word? I've got the word out. Out in schools, and because that's the nature of music.
So where do the orchestras meet at the moment then?
They're still at,
Still
still at the fourth.
And we're looking for contingent
Yeah.
somewhere else.
There are spaces, so I've seen, so I put, the Kennebec School, Hope Below, I think have been used before. There's an event that unfortunately I can't attend that's going on.
St James has a
St
space.
James has a space. St James's space is very good actually. There's a good stage there, and the the setup and the PA is good.
Okay,
I think
thank you for that.
move on. Yeah.
Yeah, so the panel recently undertook a visit to Highlands College and saw that there are challenges within the building, quite a few of them, unfortunately, that makes that certain areas of the building are now closed. However, there is no budget assigned for refurbishment and upgrades to Highlands College until 2026. Would you like to give us a bit more detail on the reason why that is happening?
There's a couple of things there. There is a role for Jersey Property Holdings in those repairs, which we have to look at more closely and what they're delivering. And I think that is an issue that we need to take on board. It is also the simple fact that the plans for a new campus, I think, did leave some repairs that were never done because that never happened, that new campus, which is a real shame. And Highlands is in the place. There are some contingency funds for repairs where they're needed, but I think also, Property Holdings need to take on their responsibilities as well. And we are talking very closely about their, are they called KPIs or what are they called? No, they're called, that contract.
SLA.
Yeah, the SLA, sorry, service level agreements, and whether or not they're appropriate for what we want. So I think that's one of the things. I don't know if anyone else wants to say something about Highlands and what we're going to do there.
Okay, maybe I can. Anyone?
I think all I would add is that it's a major programme because it's a huge facility, and it's recognised that we need a new facility, and so in essence we're quite limited around what we can and can't do within the site. But there is maintenance allocation for capital.
Thank you. Could you also please outline how SIPES and I&E are collaborating and what discussions have taken place with regards to prioritising the building?
Yeah, I think one of the problems we have is, I think one of the problems we've had in SIPES and in education in general is understanding education. So if you are running a programme of repair, so if in this building the window breaks, you can put a board over it and it might take a long time to do. If you're in a school and a fence blows down, which is access to a road, that's an urgent repair. Now, it may go on the list, but I think the urgency of that has sometimes not been understood, and therefore schools go ahead and repair it themselves using their budget. So I think there's been a confusion over what we're doing, and I think the conversations over the service level agreements will address that. And I think that's one of the, if you like, what's the phrase, the sort of fine-tuning is perhaps a good phrase of the way in which the services that we get for Jersey Property Holdings could be more directed to the genuine needs within education as an estate, as an entity in itself, because it is a specific entity. We are looking after children, and there are some things that just have to be done. Yeah, and I think that will help us, and those are I would say that the main discussions I want to have is increasing that and understanding of the necessity of some of the repair and the speed and the access to that in order that facilities can continue. So that's some of the main areas, and also that's about the way things are prioritised. But then, of course, I'd say it's a priority for education.
Okay.
Again, I won't be doing this wrong.
I mean, Highlands College does a lot of
Absolutely.
multitasking, doesn't
Absolutely,
it?
yeah.
So what is your assessment of the sustainability of Highlands College as a building for the future learning and development needs? We talked about maybe possibly needs a new building, but...
It does. Highlands College still delivers a remarkable number of courses. It has, I think it's 418 apprenticeships at the moment, including higher apprenticeships in the facilities that it has. It delivers level 3 courses across the piece. It delivers access to education, it delivers higher education. And what they do at Highlands College is work miracles with what they've got in terms of intelligent timetabling and rooming, etc., etc. Yes, of course, what we need to do is try to increase that access to that and repair. We need to also look, I think, at other buildings around the education estate and how we could, because we have, one of the things I talked about recently is further education and higher education and the way in which we need some sort of hub for bringing all of that together so you have that life of a student. One of the things that could ease the burden, that's the wrong word, you know, to the provision up at Highlands is to provide that hub and free up some spaces there. So we do need to be intelligent in the way we do that. One of the things that we can do is as we move into the new building at whatever it's going to be called, Union Street, that's it, 1 Union Street I think it's called, that will free up the education building. Now, Skills Jersey can move into there, so they've got one door. That frees up spaces perhaps that we can use as well. So I think what we need to do is look at intelligently at our estate, and then when the pinch points really come, we may be able to assist with that. And I think that's something we need to look at into the future.
The only thing I was going to add was after our site visit, we found that the areas of the building where the technical courses and vocational courses take place, they are the ones who actually needed more attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we are really trying to, provide
Yeah,
that
and I
sort
think
of learning skills for Jersey people.
Yeah, and I
so
think
that would be a priority.
Absolutely. I think it's time we revisited some of that to see what we can do urgently. And this is about this priority that I'm talking about with Jersey Property Holdings.
That will be a priority.
Particularly, I think, and again, that's the advantage of having in the CSP some stuff about, the things about lifelong learning, about apprenticeships and about training on Ireland. And I think we're starting to, perhaps it will inevitably take time, but I think we're starting to recognise as an island there are some really key areas there for the island as a whole.
Okay,
And perhaps we're seeing more the importance of Highlands now
good.
and its value,
We'll have
which is
to
good.
move on.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
My questions are very much around education, employment and training, so they may not take long to answer. Part of your legislative programme, you've highlighted updates made to the higher education order. I think we talked to you about this on the 19th. Can you confirm that if that work will be funded through the CSP priority funding or lifelong learning and skills development?
I would imagine that's more business as usual, isn't it? It wouldn't be either. Any legislative change, that's that word, needs that we're looking at. It's been an ongoing process.
Specifically around the distance learning and the grants.
Change to
boundaries.
legislation shouldn't be massively.
You're talking about the resulting costs from the change of
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, sorry. When you talk about this, I
clear in the
genuinely
question.
think about, because we've been so involved in what we're actually going to produce, I get a little bit focused in on that. Yes, it will be linked to that, but we're going to see about how we're going to get that legislative change and what we're going to do. The stuff we've talked already about, the higher education changes and distance learning, so that will be costed. That's included in the CSP.
And the grant thresholds, is that?
Yeah.
But the grant thresholds presumably will be funded out of your business as usual funding, or is that coming out of CSP as well?
There is a gap, isn't there, depending on the level that it goes up from. Do you want to explain this rather than you looking at me saying, go on, we'll mess it up?
You're doing very well.
No, I saw that look, Anne, in your eye.
I was willing you on. Yes, so the money that's in the CSP, 630 and 25, 600 odd, sort of about half of it is around changes to the student finance funding for various elements, distance learning, there's the grant thresholds. So that is just really, people have ended up with lower grants this year than last year because their wages have gone up due to inflation.
Yes.
So although we put the grant up, people still came away with slightly less. The minute we get the order through, that will be readdressed and put back onto a proper footing.
So that's where a lot of the
and
costs have
that
come
did
from.
need extra funding because it's going to be fairly significant.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in your letter to us as well that you're undertaking a number of training provisions and tracking systems to help address the gaps and improve outcomes for young people who are not in employment, educational training.
Yeah.
You've said that further work's going to continue into 2025.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a brief overview of that work?
Yeah,
and how it's likely to pan out during your term?
Yeah, this is about, and do jump in if you want to answer, this is about joined up systems as much as anything about sharing information on young people so they're identified quickly, the risk of not being in education and training is identified earlier so they can be earlier interventions.
Yep.
John, do you want to, because I've lost the page. Sorry.
Page 25. So we did get some funding in the government plan, previous government plan for this, and as the Minister outlines, we've effectively brought together Skills Jersey, Highlands College and some dedicated roles within the youth service, and they've taken a different approach to tracking and trying to focus where we've got young people at risk of not being in education or employment. It's been quite successful. So we've the identification of the young people has been the biggest positive. We've worked with CLS to be able to get the data. And the team have been able to target their focus much more. I have to say, Highlands have been excellent in what they've been able to do because they've provided the biggest access point in terms of apprenticeships or other vocational options. So it's an improving position. It's been part of the previous CSP, previous government plan, that has been really fruitful for us.
Okay.
There's much more to do, and we know that in this space.
I think as well that one of the reasons, and it's sort of linked, I would suggest, that we prioritise the pastoral is because we had some young people who are really not accessing education where we want them to. So improving that facilities can have knock-on effects elsewhere, which are really positive. We don't want people not in education, employment or training, because the long-term impact of that is significant. Because at some point we're going to have to pick that up. And
When La Passerelle opens, will your kind of sort of intermediate unit that's up at Highlands at the moment close, or will that be maintained?
PDC.
Yes.
They'll be working together.
Together.
Ideally, we want to bring it all together so that
Okay.
you've got La Passerelle having.
So the PDC budget won't be affected by the development of La Passerelle during this term? Okay, thank you. Can I just...
because there's a budget already for those students.
Yes,
it's just,
there
to
is.
me, it's not spent well, and because it's more expensive when you do it in a more disparate way. Let's not blame anyone.
Yeah.
The facilities aren't right. We're trying to put that right.
Okay, thank you. Just talking about apprenticeships, can you sort of give us your assessment of the current system for apprenticeships?
In terms of accessing them or what's running?
Of the work that's being undertaken?
Yeah, there are.
What's been considered?
Yeah, there are a significant number of apprenticeships going on at the moment. Significant numbers in different areas. For example, there are 127 electrical apprenticeships going on, 44 plumbing. I won't go through the entire list.
Please don't.
I think there is a real flexibility in apprenticeships, and I think the work they're doing there is very good, and we've had some really good communication with them. The way they're working with Skills Jersey is also very good to identify and to get people onto apprenticeships. There will always be problems with finding enough, well, I don't know about enough, but the right apprenticeships, the right person, and matching those people and keeping them on there. And there is some work that we need to do in the coming months, I think, in terms of how living wage and so on affects apprenticeships and what that will do and how we support that and how we encourage people into apprenticeships that we want on the island and skill young people up, but also older people. I think they're very successful. I think they're very good. I think they're delivered well. When you did your tour, you may have seen some of them going on. I know I went up there when there was a competition, inter-island competition going on. It was really effective. Could we do better? Can always do better, but I think it's about targeting what we need on the island. I will say one of the things, actually, I'm sorry going on a bit, we have to also define apprenticeships a little more clearly, because there are some very technical apprenticeships that have different certification to others, and I think we've had a blanket idea of just an apprenticeship. I think we need to be really clear as to what we mean by that. You know, is it a programme of study that leads to very distinct stages of qualification as you go through? That's a genuine apprenticeship. You know, level 1, level 2, level 3. I had a meeting the other day with the construction sector, and it was a really interesting conversation with the guy who knew. I thought I knew about levels in education and exam boards. The levels, as you're talking about electrical apprenticeship, for example, are phenomenal. The different range of things that have to be done. So I think we need to really define those carefully as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add in quickly before you say your next question, Helen? Do you have any advice for those children, those young people who cannot get a placement as part of their apprenticeship?
Go and speak to Skills Jersey. Go and make an appointment with Skills Jersey and get involved and let them do their job to help you with that, because that's precisely why they're there. I'm hoping one of the things is to have that one front door and they can really start to know about that. That would be my first advice, is go to Skills Jersey.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you, I've finished my questions.
Okay. So I have questions now about early years. We received a submission from the Jersey Early Years Association where they've stated they believe that the models for early years are incompatible. They state that the private, voluntary and independent sector is entirely dependent on the creation of fee income with no other revenue sources, while the public sector is government funded. With, depending on policy, access to seemingly unlimited resources. How would you address this potential disparity?
I don't...
How would you address the concern?
Well, there's a couple of
out?
things here. The NEF funding is a government fund that goes to private nurseries as well, so there's an access to funding through government funding in that way. School nursery places that have always existed, I don't think they're a competition. I think we have one sector providing in different ways, and we need all of those sectors to be working together and to be compatible with each other. I think the notion, I think these juxtapositions that are being set up I find difficult, because what we're trying to do, well, there's two things. First of all, the CSP, the first thing on the CSP is the development of nursery places. There's a recognition, there's a lot of work that went on the round tables previously, and up to 2 years of work in saying the provision that's needed. One of the things identified there, and stop me if I'm wrong, guys, is, Jonathan, you've done a lot of work on this, is the need to extend provision, particularly for 2 to 3 year olds, and the recommendation from that panel was to do that as quickly as possible. And the way in which we do that may well use government resources, but that's not in competition with the nurseries that already exist, but it complements and helps support parents and children to have a nursery place.
Yeah, I think from my memory of their letter to us was that they were concerned about losing their placements of the older children, and that would affect their ability to continue.
That's exactly why we're running pilots. Pilots are run to see the impact on the wider sector. We're very aware and cognizant of the fact that a significant number of children go to private nurseries. It would be completely counterintuitive to do anything to lessen those places when we're trying to increase nursery places. So what we have to do is we have to work really carefully, pragmatically, trying pilots out as we go to see, is this the way to increase those places? I mean, we have spoken about increasing 3-year-old provision in schools. I've also said, what about if we increase 2 to 3-year-old provision in those schools, because it's more expensive for nurseries because of the ratios. Okay? But we have those facilities there. The other thing you need to remember is that schools have a great deal of flexibility in their resources. They have those buildings and they have those spaces. The example of what's happening at Dover with the JCCT is a specific need being met for young people who cannot access nursery because of those needs. That's an excellent pilot, because it shows a number of things. One, addressing the needs of those young people. Second, how an outside provider can work within a school environment to provide nursery provision where it's needed. And third, what are the implication and knock-on effects on that into the wider community and the wider sector? That's exactly the reason that we're running the pilots elsewhere, in Plat Douai,
Dover, Trinity.
Trinity. Okay, so I hope that what we can do is get to a position where we can meet the needs in terms of nursery provision in a flexible way, and, if you like, consolidate what we have already and provide some security into the long term for all the sectors involved.
Okay, that's good. Their submission also states that government is the regulator for the private sector, as well as being that they feel its competitor. Do you see this as a potential conflict of interest?
Well, I don't see it as a competition. I think perhaps the only competition, if you the language around that of competition, I would suggest it's about the provision if there is a recognised need for provision, we're going to use the resources that we have as government to try and extend that for parents to have nursery places. It's not about, I think the notion that we're trying to put other people out of business is simply not the case. It's not about nationalising the nurseries. I mean, I had a deputy come to me and say, I understand you're going to nationalise all the nurseries and give them 30 hours free for 2 to 3 year olds. We've never spoken about that. It's simply undoable, simply not in the plan. And most importantly, it's not going to get the provision that we need across our sectors.
Yeah, okay.
There are really good nurseries out there. I've been visiting lots and lots of them. It's really pleased to see, a lovely place to go, exhausting. I don't know how people do it all day, but really, really good places to go. We want to support that in the best way we can. Whenever you implement change, there will be concerns. But every time we discuss these concerns, I believe we can move forward, and that's where we need to go.
Okay. What studies have been undertaken to ensure that any potential demand for more nursery places for the 2 to 3 year olds will be accommodated?
In terms of numbers,
Yeah, so that they can actually get their places.
you mean how do we know those numbers? Sorry, I'm confused.
Well,
by the
you'd have to
question.
know the numbers, any work on what you think the numbers will be and
Jonathan,
what's available for them.
Sorry, if you say something about estimates and numbers, and I'll give my view on that afterwards, because I think you have to get the estimate where we are now, and I'll give you a view on that as well. That's okay.
So I guess we're into several different phases to get to that end point, where that end point is something which we are confident in is a number required, a new space is required. So we know in talking with settings that waiting lists are in place. We know from petitions that there is a demand for more places and for further choice. We know directly from parents that to be the case. We did the first survey of earlier settings about this time last year, and that indicated there was a gap of somewhere between 350 and 400 places between those filled spaces in 3s to 4s and those filled spaces in 2s to 3s. It would be wrong simply to jump to the conclusion that that therefore is the number, but you start to get an indicator or indication of what the range might be. But we absolutely need to do more work, and that's one of the things we can do whilst the pilots are in place is also do market testing. We want to speak to some parents, we want to get a greater understanding of demand so that we can then fix on a point which enables the Minister to talk about, in the event that we move towards a universal offering, this looks like the demand today, this looks like the increase in demand, and therefore we can understand the financials more clearly. Maybe the final point on this is also coming back to one of the opening principles the Minister's outlined, which is in anticipating that putting more money into the sector creates more demand. We want to do that in a way and at a speed which aligns with the capacity of the sector to fulfil that demand. So we know from elsewhere, if a load of money goes in and it stokes up demand, but the places aren't there, that creates all sorts of upset and concern. So principle to align the increase in demand and supply as best possible together.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing, there are a number of variables in this. If you want a precise number, and we know where that is, that's going to be almost impossible forever. And there are so many variables. We talk about demographics dropping, but demographics started dropping about 4 or 5 years ago, but there are still significant demand in nurseries. We have migration to the island, and migration is changing, so there'll be more families with children. And one of the things that will sell Jersey to people coming here as we move into Pillar 2 taxation, for example, is good nursery provision, good education, good health. Those are the 3 real indicators for jurisdictions where people want to come and stay there. So that nursery provision needs to be in place. By using the sector that we have much control over in government, we can have that flexibility. There will always be a range of places needed. But what I would like to see is have the provision put in place to have a secure provision across the sector, without massive waiting lists, so that parents can access. But the notion that there's any idea of putting the sector out of business that's already there is simply not what we are intending to do, because it is completely counterintuitive to the outcomes that we want.
Okay.
So that balance should always be there.
Okay.
I just to say one more thing. In schools, for example, it is a lot easier for us to scale down, that's the word I'm looking for, and scale up provision. We do it all the time with year groups. You may have a 1 form entry, 2 form entry, go down to 1 form entry. You don't demolish the school, you just have 1 form entry, and then when you're ready for the bump coming up again, and it hasn't been the drop we thought there would be, there are still significant numbers, And I know we're aware of numbers dropping into the future, but I have said a number of times we need to be very wary of that, so that provision is there. There's flexibility within our system to do that if we have a stable force elsewhere.
I just wanted to add as well, we also have had a submission from the Jersey Association of Child Carers who've raised a number of concerns about the plans. And one thing I just wanted to ask you about quickly was this adult-to-child ratio. So in nurseries, in school nurseries, I think it will be 1 adult to 6 2-year-olds, whereas in privates it's 1 to 4, and for childminders it's 1 to 2. So there's a real disparity there, and I wonder if you can...
Do you want to give the correct numbers?
The quotation of 1 to 6 was a misunderstanding of a discussion in a PTA meeting on provision in one of the pilot schools.
Right.
It was referring actually to the older age group, but I think, Minister, you met with the chair of the Association of Childminders since that submission, and that's been clarified.
And we've had a good, and I'm arranging a meeting which will be about 6:15 in the evening because there are childminders all day, so we can meet in person to talk to a number of childminders about the concerns that they had over those ratios. In schools, in terms of ratios, you have to think that there are buildings within much larger buildings, so there are other people around is one thing. There has been traditionally an issue over the fact that you have a graduate teacher available, so that might change the ratios. I'm quite happy to bring ratios down in schools if we can find the staffing because of what's best for children.
Just to make it clear, is that not the case? So the adult-to-child ratios in the school for a 2-year-old is not 1 to 6?
No, what was happening in that particular school is the number of entry to the school nursery for the next school year had dropped to 18 children. There was a teacher and 2 adults, and that is 1 to 6, but that isn't happening because the staff are being used in other parts of the school. So it was just a misunderstanding of a conversation in the PTA meeting. So that isn't the ratio. The ratio for 2-year-olds is being worked up now and is the same across the sector. So we're only piloting this work, so there aren't published criteria that say a 2-year-old in a school because we're only piloting that work starting on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen the submission from the childminders on your website yet. I apologise for that. I have spoken to them after they submitted it. One of the issues there was around access to the NEF for 2 to 3-year-olds, whether that would happen for childminders, and the answer is simply, I would say yes, but we have to develop that NEF model for 2 to 3-year-olds anyway. But one of the things we have a lot of learning from the NEF model from the 3-year-olds.
Okay,
so there's things, again, learning from what we've done previously.
No, it's fine, thank you.
Okay, well, I think actually that's all our questions, and we've just gone past 3:30. Yes,
Brilliant.
just a minute
That is
past.
timing and a half.
Thank you.